And we're live. Hello, everybody out there in the internet land. I'm here with Belinda Fettke. Yeah, I'm sorry, Belinda. I should have asked you before. Is that how you say your last name? Is it Fettke?
It's Fettke.
Fettke.
It was German, Fettke, with a nice big spit on the end, till they came to Australia. They modified it. So yeah, Fettke.
All right, Belinda Fettke. So Belinda Fettke has done an incredible amount of activism for low carbohydrate diets. Now, I don't even actually know the full story behind her husband Gary Fettke. Belinda runs a website called, is it I Support
I
Gary?
support Gary. I support Gary.com. Um, I don't think the Australian Health Practitioner Regulation Agency, the medical board, expected me to start an actual website campaigning against their decision to silence my husband from speaking out about the harms of sugar and processed foods. Gary's an orthopedic surgeon in Tasmania, and not only has his health been very poor in 2000, he was diagnosed with a pituitary tumor, and so he had major surgery, stereotactic radiotherapy, and chemotherapy. In 2004, he had more surgery, and by 2009, they said there was nothing more they could do. The chemo couldn't hold it, and so this is his journey into looking at what else can I do here. And so he found out about sugar. His PET scan in 2000 lit up like a Christmas tree to glucose.
Right.
And no one had ever said anything to him about maybe consider your diet, maybe think about what you're eating. And I think chemo drives more of a hunger for sugar as well, which is interesting.
Mm.
So Gary was a sugar addict, glucose addict, in that he had a lot of carbohydrates. He was eating a lot of breads, pastas, cereal, juice, all sorts of things that were probably feeding this cancer and couldn't control it despite the chemo. And when he went on a low sugar diet,
Yeah.
he found that his cancer was going into remission. So after a year of being in nutritional ketosis, um, which is low sugar processed foods, it's a low glucose load, and using ketone bodies to fuel instead of glucose.
Yeah, yeah. We've talked about to a lot of guys like Andrew Scarborough. We've talked to Dominic D'Agostino several times on the
Yes,
channel
it
here.
was
So
Dominic D'Agostino that Gary spoke to about it at the beginning. So Gary's actually been off all chemotherapy for 5 years, and his tumor is in complete remission. Hasn't
wow.
gone away, but it's in remission. And so for him, diet has been incredible, and he's been able to come off over 10 medications. But
Wow.
it didn't take long for him to start to think, I've got a tsunami of people with type 2 diabetes complications, and type 1 as well, but mostly type 2. They're requiring amputations of bits of their feet, um, and even lower legs. Before Christmas in 2016, he saw 7 people who had ulcers on their feet and lower legs that were uncontrolled and would need surgery. And from 10 years ago, when you might see 1 or 2 people a year, this is it's a horrific condition in Tasmania right now. And he started working with his patients, thinking, well, diabetes type 2, especially when you eat carbohydrate, if you don't eat carbohydrates, you potentially don't need your medication. You potentially don't need all these things. It doesn't have to be a chronic progressive disease, as we've been told,
Right.
if you drop the sugar and carbohydrates. So as a doctor, this was a really important message for him to learn himself and then to see in his patients. And he became an outspoken advocate for reducing sugar and carbohydrates because of his patients that he was looking after. And then he started talking louder in the community. When he was reported to the Medical Board of Tasmania for telling people in hospitals to reduce their sugar, by a dietitian, by a dietitian at the hospital, um, he had maybe 5,000 people following him on social media at the time. We've got a catchment area of 120,000 people. We're at the very bottom of the world. We're so far away from everything else. And the expert witness in Gary's case was an emeritus professor of Southeast Asia Pacific region in nutrition. Like, we're talking the biggest gun in nutrition was called into Gary's case to decide whether he could tell people to reduce sugar or not. I thought my alarm bells started to ring and think, this is really odd. So when the board that was a star chamber investigation for 2.5 years. His right of reply was only via email. They'd twist his message, they'd misconstrue it, send back more, you need to answer this, you need to answer that. And when I discovered that the expert witness in Gary's case was working for Sanitarium, which is a processed breakfast cereal company in Australia, wholly owned by the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and as such they pay no tax. When I found that this expert witness had worked for Sanitarium, I thought, well, maybe this is where it's a cereal company, so the anti-carbohydrate, the low carbohydrate message Gary was putting out there was probably conflicting with the cereal messaging that Sanitarium was promoting, and I would say impacting on their bottom line. So they brought in, not Sanitarium necessarily, but the Dietitians Association, APRA brought in this big gun to silence Gary. And when his determination came about in November 2016, he was told that even if low carbohydrate healthy fat principles became accepted best practice, he was never allowed to talk about it, and his caution was lifelong and non-appealable. So we have fought for that. That was a 2.5-year investigation where he couldn't be on social media.
Who tells people that they're never allowed to talk about this, even if it becomes the standard of care and accepted?
The Medical Board of Australia told Gary he was never allowed to talk about it. So for the last 2 years, so I started a website, I Support Gary. I thought, this is ridiculous.
I've got their website pulled up right below for everybody to see, isupportgary.com.
So I've talked about Gary's story. I've talked about the issues we've had with the hospital system, which certainly ganged up on Gary. There was a lot of mobbing. The Dietitians Association of Australia actually wrote or the CEO of the Dietitians Association back in 13 and 14, wrote to the then CEO of the Launceston General Hospital where Gary was working, pretty much effectively telling them to silence him. So within weeks of that second letter from the Dietitians Association, a dietitian at the hospital reported him to the medical board. So we think this has been a targeted campaign. And because it was non-appealable, I went to the public. I thought, the public can be my jury. Let's see what people think about how my husband's been treated and this ridiculous ruling that was put onto him. So for 2 years, we've fought very publicly because we couldn't appeal it through the courts. Mm-hmm. And we went to see the National Health Ombudsman here in Australia. And for 2 years, she was looking into Gary's case because she was able to consider failed process. So if she considered there was something wrong with the process that Gary had been investigated by and his determination, she could question and send it back to APRA, which is what happened. Of course, the Tasmanian APRA board said, there's nothing wrong, we've done nothing wrong, send it back. And she's gone, well, actually, I think there is. She sent it to an independent medical board, and within 6 weeks, it was completely thrown out. So Gary was pretty much subjected to 4.5 years of our community, the medical community, personally, professionally, and financially. It's cost us so much for him, and then it all seems like it was all set up. So my website talks about what I started to look into because I thought, well, why is he being silenced from advocating this? And so I've gone down a lot of rabbit holes looking into the evolution of our plant-based dietary guidelines, because I worked out Gary wasn't just in trouble for talking about low carbohydrate, reducing sugar. He's actually in trouble for talking about advocating animal proteins and fats. And that was something we never, ever considered. So on my website, I delve into a whole lot of things. If people want to hear about the science behind low carbohydrate healthy fat, Gary's actually got an abandoned website at the moment because he's been too busy doing everything else. But nofructose.com, and he talks about the science. I'm much more about the vested interests and the ideology that have shaped these guidelines. And I guess that's where this EAT-Lancet commission report has come into my vision and working through that. But it's really interesting, Tristan. I can adopt the silence.
Yeah, that was beautiful. I mean, the way that you laid it out, there's so many little threads here that any one of these threads could unravel the whole weave. You mentioned the Seventh-day Adventist aspect of Gary's demonization. I thought that was kind of interesting. One of the first people that kind of called out Gary and reprimanded him seemed to have some sort of a connection with Seventh-day Adventism. Why is that relevant? Just to touch on it with the crew who's listening here. And I just also want to go ahead and send anybody who hasn't listened to Dr. Sean Baker's podcast, the Human Performance Outliers podcast. Belinda goes very in depth on the Seventh-day Adventism, the history of Seventh-day Adventism with the dietary guidelines. So check that podcast out, and shout out to Sean Baker. But yeah, how did Seventh-day Adventism
Well,
connect to
originally I
this?
looked into Sanitarium. I just looked at it as a processed cereal, breakfast cereal company. And so just looking at that angle at first. And then started to go, wow, I hadn't thought about Seventh-day Adventist Church and the ideology. Their belief is the Garden of Eden diet. They believe in the First Testament, not the Second Testament of the Bible. And so to them, there is no role in hunter-gatherer. There's no hunter-gatherer. There's no role for meat in the diet because they truly believe the Garden of Eden was the God-given
Right, so in
diet.
their theology, they're going back to the Garden of Eden through dietary habits, and they're entering kind of almost this reverse ascension back into the Garden of Eden.
And they believed, the prophetess of the Seventh-day Adventist Church had visions where she was told that meat was a stimulant. And back in the 1800s, 1863, this health reform vision, the idea that meat was a stimulant that was potentially as bad, if not worse, than alcohol or cigarettes was quite fascinating. And it became church doctrine. It wasn't just something that was spoken about. And so this anti-meat agenda has been driven. They believed it to such an extent that they were always looking for ways to help people eat that didn't include animal fats and proteins. Mm-hmm. And most of your listeners, most people that I speak to would have heard of John Harvey Kellogg. Well, he was a health reform vegetarian, and it's vegetarian at that time because the term vegan didn't become coined until 1944. So the Garden of Eden diet is vegan. You know, it's fruits, grains, nuts, seeds, and vegetables. So
and they were ahead of the curve because veganism was only really named in the 1940s. I forget the guy who named veganism, but
I do too. He was the head of the Vegetarian Society in the UK. Yes, 1944 it was named. So it's termed vegetarianism, but it is a vegan diet. And so they were looking for ways, because they couldn't very much tell people they couldn't eat meat and dairy without having something to offer them in the way of health foods. So they've been driven to develop foods that will align with their message. John Harvey Kellogg invented cornflakes, but before that he'd already invented nut butters and nut meat analogues. So he was using nuts as a meat. A lot of the things that he was using back in Battle Creek Sanitarium, where he was working, a Seventh-day Adventist hospital. He was a devout Seventh-day Adventist. He grew up in the church. And so his cornflakes were part of this anti-stimulant, anti-masturbation thought of the Adventist
and
beliefs.
What kind of a stimulant did they believe it was? What type of stimulation were they concerned with that meat would elicit in its sinful users?
It affected their spirituality. It stimulated baser passions, which is quoted in their doctrines, and it made people do the most heinous sin of the time, and that was masturbation, self-vice. And it wasn't just men, it was women and children, and they were very concerned about this. They felt it defiled the body, and then you wouldn't be accepted into heaven.
It's really interesting because there's such a common thread of this throughout various spiritual traditions, in the world, like the restriction of meat and as a way to become a part of the web of being or to stop the cycle of suffering. But I think it's interesting, even just in the Christian tradition, right? If you look back in the 6th century, so I got a book here. I couldn't find there's actually several pages that refer to very similar to Seventh-day Adventist groups. This was written by St. John of Damascus in the 7th century, so 1500 years ago, and he's talking about certain groups, and this is the book called On Heresies. So he says the Pythagoreans, or the Peripatetics. Pythagoras held the monad in providence. He also held that it was forbidden to sacrifice, that is to say, to sacrifice to the gods. He further forbade the eating of animals and enjoyed abstinence from wine. He made a distinction between he also held that the transmigration of souls from body to body, even in the case of animals and reptiles. And there's various other groups that he mentions in the early, this is in the 1st century AD, and he mentions several other groups that forbid eating meat, and also most of the groups also that forbid meat forbid marriage. So that's been kind of linked with fertility since at least the 6th century. And this is a book in Eastern Orthodoxy that would be considered a heresy to say that you couldn't eat meat.
I think it's really interesting, and for your listeners and for anybody else, I'm always using the disclaimer, I'm not anti-vegan, I'm not anti-religion. I've just found it a really fascinating history lesson, which I've been learning about. But I'm pro-choice, and especially for health. And if Gary ate a plant-based vegan diet, he wouldn't be here. His tumor could not cope with that glucose load. So for him, meat heals. And I think it's very concerning where this big vegan push is going, not only into communities, but into medical education and going to government policy and all of these things. It reminds me very much of the low-fat movement from the 1970s, which I also believe came from Adventist ideology, coupled with the food industry. The food industry loved the fact that the Adventists were doing all this research to get animal fats out of the system. Where could they work towards? And so it's been an alignment. The two are married because it's just perfect. This belief and the vested interest, what they can potentially create from that.
Yeah.
And so it was low fat, but I think over the last 50 years, we're finally chunking away going, well, actually, people need some fats, and they're working out how to make plant fats. But this anti-meat now, wow, what does that open up for the food industry if we have alternative meat or alternative protein?
Yeah.
And if you think back, the Adventists were already doing it in the 1890s with their nut meat analogues.
Yeah.
They were, John Harvey Kellogg was using soy as an analogue to start to make fake meats. And by the 1970s and 80s, the Seventh-day Adventist Church owned companies that were producing alternative meats. And the hippie movement started around then, so they were capitalizing on the groups that were thinking and aligning with that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the vegetarian groups were a really big part. And if you look at a lot of the hippie cults that kind of came around in the 70s, a lot of them, most of them are based on Eastern mysticism, right? And they would always tie in diet. So Osho's cult, the Rajneeshis, was a vegetarian cult. You look at many of these cults and in the U.S. that popped up around the 60s and 70s, and vegetarianism was a major part of a lot of that, for sure.
But the Seventh-day Adventists, dietitians and researchers provided the American Dietetics Association with all the information to pass the position papers on the health and efficacy of a vegetarian vegan diet. So they provided the science. Yeah. They provided the background. So you had groups that were talking about it, but until you had it science, it couldn't become policy. It couldn't go into hospitals and schools and prisons and wherever else. The dietary guidelines give that platform to take it much further. And this is where it's been very interesting finding that association. I think, as you've touched on, it's really important for people to understand or to recognize there's a marked difference between the origins of Eastern vegetarianism and Western vegetarianism. And so the Eastern vegetarianism, that still respects the role of animals in the environment, very much so. They understand that they need ruminants to fertilize the soil. They often use milks or ghee from the animals. So it's not a complete no animal
not
in any way.
Not vegan diet whatsoever. Never has a vegan diet been even tried in the Eastern mysticism. In fact, they revere the cow for the cream, for the milk. They know they need those fats.
They know they need those animal proteins and fats. It's unbelievable. Whereas the Western vegetarianism, that started with the Bible Christians in the 1830s. Sylvester Graham was a big proponent. And again, it was that anti-sex, anti-meat,
Yeah.
anti-stimulants message. And the Adventists followed on from that. So where we've come to now, I truly believe is the mix of the two. And I'm just trying to raise awareness that the whole push to vegan being safe and healthy is driven by ideology and vested interests. Whereas low carb, there's so much science behind it. And if you think about low carb healthy fats, which is what Gary's advocating, that can be across an entire spectrum. It can support people who want to be vegan. It can support people who choose to be vegetarian and all those elements. It can support people who are omnivores, and it can support people who are carnivores, who need no fiber in their diet because they've got irritable bowel syndrome or they've got mental health issues, that they're finding that taking fiber out of a diet really improves everything. This plant-based diet is a one-size-fits-all phenomena, and it's not about health of humans. It might be health about animals, or it might be health about the planet, but I'm even really concerned that this push is to get rid of animals, as in ruminant.
And you are right there. It's not just about, okay, let's stop eating the animals, let's put all the cows in a sanctuary. It's literally about getting rid of all ruminant animals and all animal husbandry. But nobody's really set to gain anything from such a situation like that, right? I mean, why would anybody want to get rid of rural food production, small family farms, and animal agriculture? I'm being facetious. I hope you're catching on, but I think that transitions really well into the EAT-Lancet report. And first, I also wanted to touch on something though. You mentioned Kellogg, and about Kellogg's. He made that sanitarium. I forget what it was called. Do you remember what
Yes,
it is?
sanitarium in Australia, Kellogg's
Okay.
in the US.
And Kellogg, did he have one in the U.S. as well?
Yes. So John Harvey Kellogg started Kellogg's cereal company. He was a Seventh-day Adventist, so the church didn't own the company, but a Seventh-day Adventist owned the company. And so I imagine all tithe, 10% of anything you earn, goes to the church.
Yeah.
So Ellen G. White, who was the prophetess of the church, had a vision that she needed to come to Australia, remembering we were a convict colony back in the 1800s. And so we were a missionary outreach post. She came to Australia with Merritt Kellogg, John Harvey Kellogg's brother, Edward Halsey, who was a baker at Kellogg's, and they came to Australia not only to replicate the church and the publishing houses and the hospital and schools and education, but the church set up sanitarium and owned it. So it was the first big food industry, I would think, that the church owned in entirety. And at this point in time, sanitarium is the biggest producer, and they call it health food, but it's fake food, of cereals and alternative protein. It's soy, it's almond milks. Then they create this whole thing, 420 different products they make.
Wow.
And they have now used their Life Health Foods as well, has moved into the UK and India, and they're moving into China at this point in time. So this is a big push. And not only have sanitarium sort of been this incredible institution in Australia and New Zealand, but they've called themselves Sanitarium Health and Wellbeing, and they have literally brainwashed our health professionals in Australia to believe that their message is right. And we haven't understood that they've been pushing this vegan message in quite a strong way as they actually have. I uncovered a couple of years ago and put it up on my website that Sanitarium was providing all of the resources for a group called Best Practice Software, which 49% of Australian general practitioners were using in the back end of their medical programs. Not only did they just have to push a button and Sanitarium resources automatically, miraculously, magically appeared that they could hand their patients about anything from type 2 diabetes to irritable bowel syndrome to obesity to anything. These fact sheets were branded with Sanitarium on the sides with imagery, because everyone just goes, oh, Sanitarium Health and Wellbeing, they're healthy.
Yeah.
They gave shopping lists for people, and of course Weet-Bix, which is their flagship cereal product came up as the most important thing you had to have on your shopping list. It was telling people to eat whole grains, and doctors weren't even aware they were doing it. Like, this is how much it's just gotten into our psyche
What
that we
year
don't
was this that
question
they
it.
entered in? Was this late 80s? Was it like 1890s or when was this?
They came. Ellen G. White came to Australia in 1890 and stayed till 1900. She was here for 10 years
Wow.
and set up this institution. The thing is, what's really interesting in Australia, we're not a very religious country because we're only so new. We don't have the established churches that you have in
Right, isn't
America
that
and
funny?
in
Yeah, that you
Europe.
see in Europe and stuff. It would have been interesting if Eastern Orthodoxy had come, which actually holds that it's
Yes.
against Scripture and it's against God's will to actually tell people not to eat meat or not to breed. Which when you're looking at when you're looking at decreasing somebody's desire to masturbate, like this it's a direct decrease of fertility is what you're looking at. You want to lower their libido is would be kind of the modern Freudian term for it, but that is a direct attack on fertility. And what I think is really interesting, and I'm sure you've probably come upon some of these maybe claims or maybe researched this yourself, is the connection between some of these big NGOs and these big foundations run by billionaires who are publicly very pro what they call depopulation. They want to depopulate the planet and decrease the population of the humans on the planet because they believe that humans are destructive, terrible creatures who are destroying the earth. Now, what's funny is the people behind this are you're looking at like the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation. Well, Henry Ford and John D. Rockefeller spent time at Kellogg's sanitarium.
Yes.
So I think that
They
that's
spent
such a
time there.
fascinating link here. What are
And
you?
remember, Henry Ford also learned about soy. He learned about spinning soy fibers and all of those things. So this the proteins that he was able to make and use. So I think that when you start to look at the connections, it's quite amazing. John Harvey Kellogg had room for 1,200 people at a time to be staying at Battle Creek Sanitarium in the heyday. Like, people went there to learn how to live a celibate life, really. He taught them how to eat vegan foods and lifestyle. It was all about exercise, fresh air, sunlight. So there was a lot of good messages as well. And I think it's this concept of I think at the moment we've sort of lost moral guidance in a lot of ways because a lot of people are pulling back from church ideology.
Mm,
And this veganism is like this moral belonging that
yeah,
suddenly you can be part of something that's making a difference, and it's giving a guideline to people because people are lost. I
yeah.
think it's a fascinating way that it's all developing and where people are going with this.
It's fascinating, right? The things that replace religion, they end up, we think we're such an advanced culture now, and
Yeah.
and we being, I don't really identify with, the cultural zeitgeist that I see going on, but people think that, their culture is so advanced and that we're so non-superstitious. um, But this stuff still prevails, right? I mean, we've got dietary guidelines based on visions from a woman who would go into a trance regularly and would get, I don't know if she would like automatic writing or something like that, but she was going into trance and getting visions, which told her about these things. And the visions also uh, told the guy who started the Seventh Day Adventist Church, he was connected to like the Millerites and these end times cults that ended up being wrong. They set a date and they were wrong, which you see still happening today. Um, it's absolutely fascinating. And
And
go ahead.
the difference with the Seventh Day Adventist Church is that they believe medical evangelism is the right arm of the church, and their vegan health reform message is the entering wedge. And so in Florida alone, they've got 26 hospitals. In Australia, I was saying, we're actually, even though we seem to be the hub of a lot of what happens around the world, and we've got this huge food industry, we've only got one hospital in the whole of Australia, major hospital. We've only got one university. But the Seventh-day Adventists are the second biggest educators of children and young people worldwide,
Wow.
second to the Catholic Church. They've just they've just grown insidiously. They've just slowly seeped their message in
Have you looked into the
to.
funding behind the church? Like, I mean, is there an open books on can one do research into?
You can look at it all. You can look at all, and they make a lot of money
Are
from
they
their
connected
food.
with any of these philanthropic organizations? I mean, it's a red flag for me whenever you see somebody associated with the Rockefeller Foundation. I mean, some of this big money interest. No.
They've kept themselves, I believe, they've got all their own foundations.
Mm.
They get tithe from a huge population that are following them. Um, and I think the thing is they start their own foundations. They've got, so they get a lot of money given to their Adventist development outreach, their missions and all the different things that they do. They've started the American College of Life, or an Adventist, started the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. So this group, Lifestyle Medicine, is going to so many different countries now throughout the world. It's very big in Australia and very big in Asia. And these three pillars appear to be very much aligned with the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And there's people who are very high up in the church involved in these
Yep.
three pillars, but they don't say that they're involved with the Seventh-day Adventist Church. They don't promote. Many people would say, I'm a Seventh-day Adventist. And so they're allowing other countries to open up their own lifestyle medicine associations without realizing that even though they might have nothing to do with religion in these other ones, like the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine claim they don't know anything about it. But when people go to their conferences and they sign up for the exam board certification and the core competencies and all the other things they might get to sign up for as part of that lifestyle medicine initiative, they're going directly back to the Seventh-day Adventist Church, people who are writing the exams and writing the board certification. And so I'm trying to explain, you don't understand, you're going back to that, and it's promoting the vegan diet. Like, this plant-based diet is infiltrating health professionals in a really, and I won't say insidious in a bad way, but potentially in a bad way.
I would
They
say
don't
that, I
realize.
mean, from my perspective, I would say that it is pretty insidious. That it is because when you're looking at it, there's shell games being played with corporate money that are going into a tax-free church. We got a tax-free thing. To me, it sounds like a really big, clever scam, and it's not that hard to set these things up. And we've seen over and over again throughout history the same type scams set up, and the free
I'm not
market.
sure. Not sure if it's a scam so much as they want to convert people. If they don't have enough people converted to Seventh-day Adventism, Jesus might not come back.
Mm.
So, it's driven from a really deep purpose. I say this medical evangelism, this health reform. The corporate church, on the other hand, may be more insidious and more corrupt, but the actual individuals who are involved in a lot of these things are doing it from a very deep purpose, a real belief. And I think what's interesting with a lot of the research that I've been looking at is this Harvard University collaborating with Loma Linda University. So the Loma Linda University is the flagship with Andrews University of Seventh-day Adventism in America.
And Harvard
And
University is kind of the flagship university that takes a lot of
Harvard,
grants from the Rockefeller Foundation. Lots of grants
yes,
from the Rockefeller Foundation.
and not just Rockefeller, but the Harvard School of Public Health Nutrition Foundation was founded from 5 food industries, including Kellogg's. And Fred Stair, who began as the head of the Harvard School of Public Health Nutrition Science, which was the first anywhere worldwide that became a school for nutrition science, was funded by the food industry to millions and millions and beyond millions of dollars. And they did a lot of work with the Seventh-day Adventists because a doctor called Mervyn Harding wanted to prove that the Adventist vegan diet, was safe and produced longevity. So Harvard started, Mervyn Harding went to Harvard to do his doctoral dissertation under Fred Stair. So I'm looking at this involvement with Loma Linda and Harvard, and I believe Harvard is just so, the School of Public Health has been massively funded by the food industry potentially the foundations, the philanthropical
Well,
foundations.
Harvard was actually heavily involved in the Green Revolution and the Gene Revolution. So Harvard was very much involved in the pushing of the GMO revolution, and before that,
Mhm.
the Ford Foundation and Rockefeller Foundation started the Green Revolution, and they all sound great on paper. We're gonna feed the world. We're gonna convert the heathen to our high yield seeds, and we're gonna give them these really high yield seeds that take a lot of pesticides, but they're very high yield. So they're getting patented seeds out there in the world now, and the philanthropy that you see from groups like the Bill Gates Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation all are involved in spreading genetically modified seeds to third world countries using IMF World Bank loans. And I mean, just how interesting that Harvard, being seminal in pushing in the modern agriculture system, is also heavily involved with Seventh Day Adventist Loma Linda University. Like they're Seventh Day Adventists, right?
And
Full on.
Loma Linda is Seventh Day Adventist
Mm-hmm.
University.
Yeah.
And Harvard, this School of Public Health, Fred Stair and then Mark Hegstead after him, have been shown to have received so much funding from the sugar industry and this promotion with Ansel Keys of the low-fat thing. They were producing research to show that we had to be low-fat to save ourselves from heart attacks. But it was also using the research from the Adventists, which have no conflict of interest because they're not financially funded. This has come from a purity side, and then so Harvard's been able to support the Loma Linda, the Adventist message on this saturated fat causes heart disease, because it's suited the food industry funding. So I would say a lot of Harvard things, because Mark Hegstead, who was the second person after Fred Stair, he was on the McGovern report and he developed the first dietary goals for America that started this low-fat agenda. And now you've got Walter Willett. And so Walter Willett has written about this great alignment that Harvard has with Loma Linda. He's actually written it, and I've got the information where that was captured. And he is not only on the advisory board of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, which is very much Seventh-day Adventist aligned and membered, populated, and started by a Seventh-day Adventist. So Walter Willett's on that advisory board, but he also co-chaired the EAT-Lancet Commission report. So again, that's the food industry. That's Kellogg's, it's Nestle, it's interesting. I was looking at quite a lot of the food industries involved with the World Business Council of Sustainable Development, and they're the ones that have worked with the EAT Foundation to create this Fresh project and work towards this EAT-Lancet report. And a lot of those companies are investing massively in the alternative meat, alternative protein companies, and heavily into Silicon Valley. Imagine if you could convince omnivores, which is the majority of our world's population, certainly in the Western world, imagine if you could convince them to morally choose to eat alternative meat, protein, and because you're doing it for the good of the planet and the good of whatever else.
It's even
animals.
activism. You can convince people to actually purchase your ideology and pay you money and energy.
And pay money, exactly.
Yeah.
So Walter Willett, I think, is a very interesting character, and Nina Teicholz has written quite a bit about his potential conflicts of interest.
Which are, I mean, how nice to say potential conflicts of interest. What a diplomatic way to say that.
Yeah. You have to do that to be safe. He is he's been very clever not to appear to accept money personally, but by having so much funding to the department that he works in, it's very a fine line. And this is something I really believe needs to become far more open in this nutrition science, which is a made-up thing, I'm sure. People need to actually start acknowledging not only financial conflicts of interest, but personal ideology and bias, because so much of it I've found has come from either people who have vegan activism, like Neil Barnard and different people from PETA, or you've got this religious ideology that's come through. Imagine if we had a scientific report come out to say that ham was going to kill everybody, processed ham, pork, and all the authors were Jewish. You'd say, well, your doctrine believes that pork is an unclean meat. And so you question the validity. You'd say, okay, I understand this is your opinion and your belief, but this needs to be scientifically rigorously
Yeah.
tested.
Yeah, it's like,
But
the,
there's
the
Seventh
Ministry of Truth
Adventists
suddenly
have
comes out
exact.
and says any books that do not agree with this doctrine are declared dangerous propaganda, and we gotta erase all of them. It's this extremism that we see in dietary conversation is really, it fascinates me, right? I mean, it's considered extreme to eat low carbohydrate diet that's high in saturated fat. That's extreme. But removing
That's
all animal foods altogether, the crux of the human diet since the beginning of time, is considered totally cool, progressive, great, fantastic, going to save the planet. And it's
and
very
that's what I
strange.
kept challenging the Dietitians Association of Australia with. I just kept putting up more and more information, just going, do the dietitians even understand what's happening to them? I know we're supposed to be talking about EAT-Lancet, but just quickly, the last thing I'd like, and then we can go into more of the EAT-Lancet.
What I would really like to bring up, first of all, before we get into this, you mentioned the World Council. All right, so I've got it pulled up. Right. Oh, no.
Yeah, the
Can you?
World Business Council of Sustainable Development, is it? World
Yes,
Development
yeah. My internet
Sustainability.
just I just got a message that my internet's being weird. So I'm sorry if I cut out, let me know. Uh, I've
Yeah.
got it pulled up. You've got your article here on isupportgary.com about the Eat Lancet Foundation, and I think it's fascinating. You mentioned the World Council for Sustainable Development, or the World Business Council for
Sustainable,
Sustainable.
and it's Bayer, it's Kellogg's, it's Nestle, it's everybody. This is this is their sustainability.
Yeah.
It's
It's
not anybody else's.
Bayer Monsanto. People forget that it's not just Bayer now. We've got Bayer
Yeah.
Monsanto, Kellogg's, Pepsi, Nestle. I mean, you've got literally all the corporations that everybody says they hate. All the people they want to save the water. Nestle's taking the water from the US and exporting it.
Yeah.
But then they want, people jump right on board willingly when they hear, "Oh, plant-based diet, it's great for the environment." That must be true. So, uh, your article here about the Eat Lancet Foundation, or the Eat Lancet Commission, is such a great example of just how blatant these connections are. So I'd love to transition into that. And if you have anything else you want to talk about before that, I'm cool with that too.
Absolutely. Well, just very quickly before we go to that, I uncovered some documents, confidential documents, just doing a search online in June last year, and it brought up a meeting between Nestle, Kellogg's, Sanitarium, and Freedom Foods cereal company here in Australia. And they acknowledged in these confidential minuted documents with the CEOs of the companies that they were paying the Dietitians Association of Australia $23,000 a year to influence, to get their members to influence, protect, and actively defend not only cereal, grains, but sugars messaging. And Gary's name was in there as targeted for active defense. So we're talking about cereal industries that are really, really committed to how can we stop this? But those same cereal industries, as we'll talk about with the World Business Council of Sustainable Development,
You nailed it.
um,
You got it.
they actually are now all investing in this fake meat.
Hmm. Yeah.
And you think, this is incredible, because we've been challenging them on their cereals and the sugary cereals and different things. They've just gone, okay, well, they just keep moving their platform. They keep reinventing themselves to produce food that we will be convinced is better for our health and the planet's health, but it's actually just driven for profit and I'd say power.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, well, when you look at the companies that are involved in this, we've got Google as well. We've got one of the
I
biggest
know.
companies in the world who's also very, very interested in genetic data, genetic testing. 23andMe's founder was formerly married to one of the founders of Google, and her sister runs YouTube. So, I mean, this is there is an interesting connection here to the whole Silicon Valley transhumanist movement. You've got lab grown meat being pushed now. Belinda, I've got a crazy reference for you, and you'd be
Okay.
fascinated. I'll send you a link to this. You can get a PDF of it. I'll send it to you. It's a 1929 Hearst Cosmopolitan magazine, published by William Randolph Hearst, everybody's favorite
Yes.
philanthropist. He published this in 1929, and it's an article by a guy named Lord Birkenhead. out of the British Royal Society. And this is the only article I could find online, the only piece of writing I could find attributed to Lord Birkenhead, who wrote this article called What the World Will Look Like in 100 Years. Save this article for your children's children's children. And in this article in 1929, Lord Birkenhead of the British Royal Society, and close associate of the Huxleys and a lot of these other families, very involved in kind of the deeper political machinations in the Anglo-American Empire, whatever you want to call it. He writes in this article that all meat will be synthetic in 100 years. It says by 2029, all meat will be synthetic and grown in a laboratory. Animal agriculture will be abolished, and only the super rich will eat real meat. And all births will be done in a laboratory as well, and all breeding will be controlled by the state. And it was literally Brave New World. This guy wrote in his predictions 1929 in Cosmo magazine. So the housewives of 1929 were getting a healthy dose of the future 100 years ago. This was being advertised.
I think that's the amazing thing. It's only 100 years. How different was it? 100 years, what will it be like in another 100 years? So,
Yeah, right. And this is, it's up to us and our kids.
Fascinating. Yeah.
Right. We've got to actually, if we don't do anything, maybe it would look like, ectogenic births where everything is selected and we're going to breed an ant colony, or I'm going to be the queen bee and all these people will be my inferiors and they will pay me with Bitcoin. And, I don't know if that's going to play out. I sure hope not. And I'm certainly glad there are people out there like you talking about this stuff. But I think that's an interesting article. I'll send it to you. You'll enjoy it.
Sean Baker brought up the Marie Antoinette quote with me, and let the peasants eat cake. And this is the idea, I think, that we're both trying to highlight to people, is that society is making the choice to eat cake because they'd rather eat cake and save the planet and save the animals and don't care about their health, because we've been so conditioned and so we've been just brainwashed to think that cake's okay, and cake in inverted commas. We'd rather eat chemical products that are made, and we'll deal with our health because we've got a bigger purpose. We've got to save the planet. We've got to save the animals. And this way people don't feel like they're missing out, because they have their technology. They have this. They've got their mobile phone. They've got their big TV that they can sit and watch. They get to have holidays, and they get to eat McDonald's, and they get to eat all these other things.
Well, they get to pretend that they're doing something with their dollars when I'm buying from the vegan section of Walmart. I am stopping the evil oppressor. Where it's like, you're buying it at Walmart, and all your vegan foods are exported from the U.S. to China for processing back to the U.S. You have this insane consolidated food supply that's being erected now, and there's no better example of the madness of it than the EAT-Lancet recommendations, especially when you look at the connections that Belinda so kindly laid out in her article on isupportgary.com. So I've got your article pulled up here. How did you first hear about this EAT-Lancet madness, and what is this stuff all about?
I would say I first heard about it through a group of thought leaders in the low carb space. People going, oh my gosh, this is coming. And Nina Tykotz probably was one of the main people who was saying, this is about to be released. We need to really consider this. I think in my article, I've sort of summarized, I start with a little bit of a screenshot talking about Sandro Di Maio, who is the CEO of EAT-Lancet. He's an Australian doctor. And his reference that I got from the internet was beans over beef, which I introduce and say anyone who's been following me will know where the beans over beef message is coming from. That's from Loma Linda University. And I did a little quick intro into some of my research into Seventh-day Adventism. But the other screenshot that I put right next to it is from a dietitian who I highly admire in Australia. And she said, Sandra, you're not thinking about biodiversity. You're not thinking about sovereignty. You're not thinking about human health. Are you really considering these things? What are you doing? And I think that's a powerful statement from a dietitian standing up going, I don't think this makes sense. And so I try to capture a lot of different people's ideas, because as I say, I'm not a scientist. I was a nurse in my past life. I've been a photographer for 20 years, and I'm supporting Gary. So my research has been trying to understand the influences on our dietary guidelines, and EAT-Lancet is one of the most powerful documents that's come out that could impact us hugely. Government policy, but as I say, medical education. They're trying to get it into schools. They're trying to get their planetary health diet as accepted as an agenda and something that has to happen. Like
Yeah,
the
mandated.
further and
It's not just like, hey, let's tell everybody that they maybe should eat some plants. This is more like we're going to work directly. We're going to interface with governments, local, national, and we're going to bring
how do we
about these
tax? How do we
guidelines.
ban? How do we regulate? How do we make this law? I mean,
Yes, and you
it's a
mentioned ban
frightening
and
document.
regulate. It's not just let's suggest. They're going full on abolitionist style, and
Yeah.
some of these people really believe that their movement is fighting an animal holocaust. Um,
And Carney Sostenabili, sorry if I haven't pronounced your name correctly, um, mentions that 37 scientists might be authoritative, but they are not consensus. And this EAT-Lancet report hasn't gone worldwide. It hasn't gone to scientists from a whole range of things that are independent. Nina Tycott's worked out 31 of the 37 actually are vegan or work for companies that support vegan messaging.
yeah,
And the panel actually said, except for Walter Willett, none of them are eating this so-called planetary health diet themselves. So why not? Why are they putting it on the masses and the elite aren't having it?
yeah.
Gunhild Stordalen, who was the instigator of the EAT, she was given the EAT Foundation as a gift from her billionaire husband, Peter Stordalen, who
Happy
owns
birthday.
a hotel chain, massive hotel chain in Norway. And she has this belief that being vegan and a vegan diet will help save the world. She has been on this agenda and collecting people. And I think once you have an opportunity to start talking on these massive platforms and people start listening and everything else, it must make you feel even more powerful and want to take it further. The connections that she's been able to develop, you just say the World Business Sustainable Development Council,
Yep.
Council of Sustainable Development, she's got food industry, she's got philanthropic groups all giving so much money to this EAT Foundation to promote this.
Yeah.
But there's a screen grab that someone shared from her Instagram account saying she'd done a handshake with Alessandro De Mayo. There's a doctor from Australia who's the CEO of EAT. Did a handshake to try plant-based vegan diet for a month. You go, you're putting this on the world and you haven't even tried it yourself for a month. Admittedly, she's a flexitarian and I don't think she eats red meat. Yeah. But this is beside the point. Here they are doing an N=2 experiment for 1 month to go, everyone has to do this.
Yeah.
And I think this is really challenging. Marty Kendall, who's an engineer in Australia, his wife has type 1 diabetes, and they were living by the dietary guidelines for diabetes and for normal living and were getting sicker and sicker.
Yeah.
So as an engineer, he's developed this amazing app and data system where he plots food and really works out the nutrient content of every single food.
Marty Kendall's nutrient optimizer. Right?
Optimizer, amazing man. He put the EAT-Lancet dietary guideline into his optimizing nutrition app and came up and found that it was only gave us 26% of the nutrients we require in a day. Not
And
only
that's
that,
just on paper, right? I mean, that's not even factoring in bioavailability of these nutrients that may be locked up in fiber or other, right? Calcium being blocked by oxalate, and you could have a lot of.
It's a scary document, and he's really pointed out that their marketing might look vegetarian or vegetable centric because their plate looks like it's half covered in vegetables. Yeah. But when you actually plot it into this data and this pie chart that he's created, it's actually only 3.1% of the pie chart is vegetables, despite the fact that the plate looks like it's half filled. And 3.1% is a reduction in the current recommendations we have in our dietary guidelines. Yeah. They advocate 0 to 14 grams of meat. And I don't know if you've worked it out, but the recommended is 7 grams, but they'd really prefer you to have none. Yeah. This is a piece of minced meat that's a ball about that size per day for the masses while they can eat meat, apparently. But, that's miniature, and yet you're allowed to have 31 grams of added sugar because Pepsi, of course, is part of the EAT
Yeah.
Foundation
And grains are the
partner.
main portion of the
And
plate too.
yeah, and you can have more added sugar than you can have meat. I mean, this isn't the sugar that's in fruits and the glucose sugar that's in the 232 grams of wholemeal grains that they recommend we have. 232 grams of wholemeal grains is equal to 58 teaspoons of glucose sugar. And that will perpetuate the type 2 diabetes mantra that it's a chronic progressive disease. You'll have it for life and you'll end up on more and more and more medication. Another partner of the EAT Foundation through this, the actual partner of EAT Foundation is Novo Nordisk, and 85% of their income is from insulin supply.
Wow. Well, I mean,
Insulin
of course,
sales.
you've also got Bayer. You've also got DuPont. You know, you've got all these.
They're part of the World Business Sustainable Council of Sustainable Development, but Novo Nordisk is actually a partner of EAT Foundation.
Well,
So it's
didn't
separate.
Eat so Fresh? All right, so it says here Fresh was jointly launched in January 2017 by the Eat Foundation
By
and
the
the
EAT
World Council
Foundation,
for Sustainable Development.
and it uses the Wellcome Trust as a major funder. Wellcome Trust is I would think, the biggest philanthropic trust in the world. It was started by a guy called Henry Wellcome, who made his fortune in pharmaceutical industry.
Yep.
And currently they have $29 billion invested in this trust,
Yeah.
of which they give $1.2 billion as a philanthropic gift to organizations they would like to support.
And it's the second biggest
I
foundation behind the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
Second biggest. Okay, there
And it
you
was
go.
started by guess who? You know, I'll let you tell the story because this is fascinating. The
Yeah,
Wellcome
so
Trust.
Henry Wellcome, as I say, he grew up in an Adventist household. His father was an elder of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And so he believed in this health reform vision. And apparently he took the Garden of Eden diet belief through his life. And I would say a lot of the philanthropic use of the money would go to supporting things that also supported that health reform vision. But
So
he,
his company that he owned eventually became GlaxoSmithKline. For those who,
yeah,
how
as I
insane
say,
is that?
$29 billion worth of pharmaceutical industry profit is the Wellcome Trust. And I read a great article that stated that a lot of the $1.2 billion that they give out annually actually goes to support activities that will counteract the companies that they're actually invested in to make this money that are creating harm. And I give a great example in the blog post that I wrote
Wow.
about emissions. But this is the whole point. The philanthropic arms of some of these foundations are simply band-aiding what they're investing their money in and creating the harm in the first place.
Right.
You know, we think, oh, this is great, they're doing this, but you go, but how have you created that? So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
a
so
real
I mean
concern.
the same foundations that started the Green Revolution to feed the planet and save the world, they also had a really deep and invested interest in eugenics, including the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Germany. So the Rockefeller Foundation helped to start the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, which was the German eugenics program, and they helped to start Cold Springs Harbor in the United States, which was where the eugenics office, I forget what it was called, the U.S. Eugenics Office or something like that was. This same organization, the Rockefeller Foundation, which is the Standard Oil Trust money from John D. Rockefeller, went into creating the Green Revolution and erecting grains as the main source of nutrition in the Western world, too. So the philanthropic
Yeah,
angle is super important that people understand. I think this might be one of the most important aspects of, the history and geopolitics that gets very, very overlooked, especially with, nutrition policy, wars, all these little insignificant things like that.
and I think this is the point. The food industry started nutrition science as an actual entity because they funded this nutrition foundation at Harvard University, and it's just grown and grown. They funded the money for nutrition reviews, which Fred Stair edited, then Mark Hegstead edited, and then the International Life Sciences Institute, which Alex Malaspina, as vice president of Coca-Cola, founded in 1978. This is, again, the same food, pharmaceutical, all those groups, like it's massive. The International Life Sciences ILSI, they now run nutrition reviews, and it's still one of the most widely used documents, journals for health professionals. And it's dictated by the food industry and the pharmaceutical industry. I mean, don't people get it? Don't they look to see where this information is coming from? I found doctors don't. A lot of doctors don't have the time. They're given information and they trust it. If it comes through the British Medical Journal, if it comes through the Medical Journal of Australia, they trust this information has been vetted, and it's really important because they don't have the time to look back. It's fascinating how healthcare has become band-aiding sick care. And it's a scary place.
Yeah, it's
It's
basically
profiting
disease management, right? I mean, it's
disease management.
lots of
If your
immune
blood pressure is
compromise.
this, you prescribe that. If this is this, you operate. Where do we come back? And I think doctors specifically aren't taught nutrition. And
Ooh,
bless you, bless you,
a
bless
little
you.
sneeze
In their
attack over
defense,
here. Yeah, we're getting some windy, dry weather, and my nose is not feeling it. It's because I'm not vegan, though, right? I mean, if I would just go on a plant-based diet, all these sniffles would disappear, and
they go away.
the cows would rejoice because we would stop abusing them. Uh,
Mm. I think Gary's had an interesting lot of research that he's done into this whole cows cause methane. Why are we picking on cows? Sheep actually perform that. Sheep give off more methane than a cow, and um, scarab. That's okay. Scarab beetles, termites, millipedes, and centipedes produce more methane than any ruminant on this earth.
That's a great point. I think I saw his tweet, and that, so
Mm,
it's there. And there's so many examples of just how incoherent the arguments that get brought forth are, but it's still he's being pushed through repetition, right? I mean, it seems like if we hear something enough, we'll believe it's true, and the
exactly.
university
Health
system is
washing.
yeah. Health. I like your term, health washing. So we've been health washed into dis-ease. I mean, what is the result of all this grain, all this sugar, and all of this? Not only is it destroying our health, but we've got a food system that we're disconnected from. Right? There's no longer family farmers. People aren't looking at having cows and goats on their land. They're looking at, well, maybe I can make it big and be a tech billionaire or something like that. I mean, that's people aren't aspiring to even be connected to their food anymore. So I think this whole global agribusiness that's destroyed local agriculture is so embodied right here in this EAT-Lancet message. It's like
Mm.
a great kind of holographic diagram of exactly what's going on here, because you've got DuPont, Bayer, GlaxoSmithKline, Seventh Day Adventism. You have all these different interests coinciding with this report that's pushing an industry mandated global policy that people want to implement with force, right? They're talking about abolition of these
Yeah.
foods.
Yes, exactly. And you think this is a very interesting concept because I don't think it's come out so blatantly before. And that's had a lot of the low carbing people um, really up in arms and saying, where's the scientific consensus on all of this? It's being mandated.
Yeah.
It's a real concern, whereas before there's much more of a soft push. But this document is very frightening.
Yeah, yeah, and it's out there in the open for us all to see. So I'm looking at the picture of the Planetary Health plate right now, right? It's kind of over the
Yeah,
top. It's
it's so
really
friendly.
yeah, yeah, and it's so elementary school, right? They got the bright colors and it's a little pie chart.
Yeah.
It's very geared towards a an uneducated audience, right? And what's crazy is when you look at some of these recommendations, like the Canadian Health, with the Canada Food Guide,
Hmm.
even the stuff that's made for physicians is so dumbed down. It's very base. Have you checked out the Canada Food Guide yet?
The Canada Food Guide is very concerning. Australian dietitians, Canadian dietitians, and South African dietitians are part of a group called the PEN group, and they work together. It's quite interesting. Um, the dietitian who was involved in Gary's, Claire Hewitt, who was the CEO of the Dietitians Association of Australia, and involved in Gary's silencing, there's a picture that who popped up recently? Oh, Marianne DeMasi put up a picture of Claire Hewitt with Claire Jules, the Jules String. Sorry, name's gone out of my head. The dietitian who reported Tim Noakes in South Africa.
Oh, wow.
So these groups, are really connected.
Yeah.
And Mark Walquist, who is Gary's expert witness, he's closely tied to Esther Walster, who was the expert witness in Tim Noakes's case.
Yeah.
They've been part of this GISM declaration, which is Planetary Health Diet, I believe.
Yeah.
A diet for planet and people. And also with Stefan Rosner, who was involved in Annika Dahlqvist's silencing about low carbohydrate, healthy fat up in Sweden. So we've got really key people that you start to map out, and you can see how they're working on this same thing, this vegan push. I would be fascinated to know how involved they are in patents. I've found some connections to patents to legumes and to the fake meats and to all these other things. Right. Again, this is a potential conflict of interest in this desire. The profitability of the fake meat, the alternate meat industry, is beyond anything you could imagine.
Oh, and it's a total monopoly too. It's an absolute monopoly on all resources.
And I think we're walking into it thinking it would be lab meats and all these things. But did I read that the latest hamburger that was made was $37,000?
Yeah, but no, it's going to be sustainable though, Belinda. There's $37,000 for one burger, but in the future, we'll make them so cheap. And the little munchkins.
I think they're pulling us, they're lulling us into this. It'll be okay because it'll all be from cells from meat.
Yeah.
But then we'll get there and they'll go, actually, it's so much cheaper to make the cheap cornflakes. So forget that.
Right. We found a real
wheat.
Yeah. Well, it'll be a few years of the lab-grown meat, and then you'll come to find out there'll be a steady campaign. They'll say, well, we've actually figured out how to really combat global warming and really deal with the depopulation issue, and they'll go full Soylent Green.
Yeah, Gary and I are going to watch that actually this weekend.
Right? I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but it's the worldview of the people that are pushing this wouldn't actually look at that as being wrong. Is what's crazy, right? They're looking. I mean, when you look at the vegan activism world, there's this sentiment that humans and animals are the same thing. You're a chicken, right? You cut off a chicken's head, that's like cutting off a child's head, right? This is what they say. That's what they profess. But of course, you don't see them, defending chickens like they were their children. So it's very hypocritical. But it's what the professed belief is. And
our daughters made an interesting observation that even the latest Disney movies, they're changing the animals. They're not violent anymore. If they're violent, they're considered outcasts and bad, and they're trying to make the animals eat a vegan diet. And this is what our children are watching. This is the education that we're giving our children, is that they're seeing lions don't want to eat meat because that's violent and that's mean.
Yeah, it's aggressive.
And they're making them
it's mean and
it's aggressive. And that goes back to that whole stimulant thing. Meat causes aggression, meat causes masturbation, meat causes...
Toxic masculinity is a key word now too, right?
And so this dulling down of everything, emotions and things. But watch some of the children's video movies and you'll be quite surprised to see that the animals are becoming vegan as well now.
Yeah. You know what? And that's totally in line with what we've been seeing in a lot of media these days. You see big pushes for sustainability, and the green diet is sustainable. We're going to be eating for the planet. We need clean meat, is what they're calling the cell meat, right? The lab-grown meat. They're going to call it clean meat, and it will be green and sustainable. But when you really look at what sustainable means, it basically means sustainable for certain companies. Like, it's sustainable for profits. We can sustain our infinite growth and consolidating our resources. We will sustain everything. And it's really crazy. It's a utopian ideal, right? To want to census all human life and all animal life and plant life and everything, and say, well, this is what the allotted level is, and if we go beyond this, everything is out of balance. So we have a very interesting time right now when we've as a society, come to a crossroads between going to the like Philip K. Dick Orwellian dystopia, or rearrange our priorities and actually figure out what it is we want to do with this with this place we're on, with this place we're at. But yeah, it's really crazy how much worldview and belief influences this dietary push. And yeah, I don't know if you've got if you're pressed for time. Would love to ask you some more questions about your article here, but if you've got to run, that's cool.
No, I'm happy to answer more if you're happy to have me around for longer.
Yeah, no, I love this stuff. I love having conversations like this. And it's always refreshing to know that I'm not the only one who will dive this deep into some of these things and look at these connections
Yeah.
because it's very important. So, you mentioned the World Health Organization's the medical officer with the World Health Organization, Dr. Alessandro De Maio. Um,
Yes.
and what link does he have to the EAT-Lancet Foundation? You put a couple
I'll
of
say he's the CEO. They call him, he's called Sandro De Maio. He's the one I did that first screen grab of at the beginning of my article. So Alessandro De Maio has gotten himself to the very top of, he's involved with the World Health Organization, but he's the CEO of the EAT Foundation. He's their golden boy. And in Australia, on the 1st of February, he's running a big Festival 21. It's promoting vegan foods
Why is it called
and
Festival 21?
planetary health
Do you know
diet.
do you know why
And
they called it
so,
Festival 21?
do I know why he called it
Yeah,
Festival
do
21?
you know what the meaning of that name is? Because
No.
it's interesting. Well, because you see a lot of ties, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. These are all
Mm.
Agenda 21, Agenda 2030 is the UN Sustainability Summit,
Okay.
right? So it seems like it's
I'd
maybe,
say it would be part of that.
yeah.
But I started following him on LinkedIn many years ago when he founded the NCD free, which is the non-communicable disease free world. And he's a big plan guy. It's amazing some of the things that he was talking about, and he was talking about fresh seasonal local foods. And Gary and I at the time, we'd started a dietary advice, a clinic with dietitians, nutritionists, and diabetes educators. And so his messages were really aligning with the sort of message we were trying to get out. And so I started following him, thinking, oh, this guy's a bit of a mover and a shaker. And then when I heard he was getting involved with EAT Foundation when Gunhild Stordalen, I became quite concerned because I knew of her agenda to push vegan diets. And as I say, she's actually not a vegan. She's a flexitarian herself. And she has a pet pig in the front seat of her Tesla car. I don't think vegan people should have a pet pig with a bow on their thing. I don't think pigs are meant to be in cars, personally.
Right.
With domesticated animals and
It's okay. She
domestic
feeds it vegan. It's a vegan pig, so it's
choices.
okay. It's sustainable.
Well, that is another thing we should talk about, is this vegan push to feed our domesticated animals vegan foods. But anyway,
Yeah.
so Sandro De Maio has been very involved. He's the golden boy. He speaks incredibly. He presents beautifully, and he has become the CEO of the EAT Foundation and pushing this planetary health diet. He has a lot of sway in Australia and certainly around the world.
Well, yeah, the World
And
Health Organization being majorly influential.
I don't know if you saw one of the images that I put up from one of my tweets, was the United Nations sustainable goal is the Garden of Eden diet by 2050.
Yeah, yeah. I
It's
wish I had
that,
that one to pull up.
who references a religious Garden of Eden diet? I mean, they
The
might say
United Nations,
vegan, might say
you know who
no animals,
donated the
but
land? You know who donated the land that the United Nations sits on? It was the Rockefeller family. The building of the United Nations, they built that. So it's it totally makes sense when you look at the history of it. Unfortunately, we don't get taught these things really. Most people don't really look at history like this, like you are, you know.
exactly. And Gary and I often say, I can't believe the stupid things we learned in history at school, all the important things are kept from you. We've been
Yeah.
traveling around the world on speaking engagements and getting to see some amazing places and experience history and culture, and just had no idea. So many things that have happened because of religion and power that you never get taught in school. And you have to be there to actually see these things. Amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's funny too. The United Nations historically is tied in with certain religions. They actually published through Lucis Trust. It used to be called the Lucifer Trust. Was the United Nations publishing company, and they publish Alice Bailey's books about the externalization of the hierarchy and these other kind of theosophy. With like this connects to Helena Blavatsky, Alice
Yes.
Bailey, and some of these characters. So the United Nations has historically dabbled in, one world religion type talk, and talk about bringing all the religions together in this one super friends council, and then we'll become like the Avengers, and we'll go take off to the stars and spread Monsanto
Yeah.
seeds to every planet. And, but how it's funny because I've got your tweet right here. Doing more with less within planetary boundaries, right? So it's literally they're literally talking about erecting a policy prison for the production of food. Planetary boundaries, right? Circumscribing a limit to
Yeah.
how much food you can produce, what you can do with your land, what you can do with your water. And when you look at a lot of this stuff, the talk about it is not just about food; it's about resource usage.
Allocation. Yeah.
I was going to say
It's
allegation, and then I just stopped because I couldn't get the word.
Patrick O. Brown is another interesting person. He started Impossible Foods. Are you aware?
Yeah. Patrick Brown,
Started Impossible
Impossible Foods, and he helped get the studies published through his, what is the journal called?
PLOS journals, PLOS open access journals, which sounds very wonderful until you realize what he's producing. But he spoke to the UN, and part of his presentation to the UN was, in my lifetime, I want to get all animal farming off the planet. He
Well,
publicly stated it.
how convenient, because the British lords of the 1920s, who were obsessed with eugenics and selectively breeding human beings as a utopian ideal, also wanted the same thing. So they're, it's Lord Birkenhead would be proud. The Impossible Burger and lab grown meat would. H.G. Wells wrote about this in his nonfiction. Bertrand Russell wrote about only the rich will eat meat, and we will basically rewrite all the books because everything will be controlled by the state. It's just there's this utopian line of thought in Western society that a lot of people don't tune into that much, except where maybe in science fiction, right? That's a big place where people see it.
Yes.
Where actually a lot of real things do get revealed through science fiction. And H.G. Wells, who wrote all these great science fiction novels back in the day, actually I don't think any of them were actually great. They were interesting stories, but he also was of the same ideology, and H.G. Wells was raised by Thomas Huxley, he was raised by Aldous Huxley's
Alice
father,
Huxley, The
Thomas
Brave
Huxley.
New World. Yes.
Yeah. So Thomas Huxley was Darwin's bulldog. He was the father or the grandfather of Aldous Huxley, and he raised H.G. Wells as well, who wrote nonfiction books all about consolidating the entire world food supply and all economics under a single system. And it's going to be great, and we're going to save everybody, and we'll stop all the wars. And it sounds cool, right? Let's all grab hands and be one. But for some reason, it never really
Maybe we
works
should
out.
start writing science fiction books.
Right?
Because we write science and no one listens to it. Like the science of low carbohydrate healthy fat principles, it's not allowed to be discussed. But maybe we need to write it as a science fiction book. Maybe that's how we get
Our
get it
science
out.
fiction book, like, I'm just laughing. I'm thinking for some reason. Sorry, my dog's crazy. Ribeye, hey, ribeye. Thanks. For us, maybe it'd be like Little House on the Prairie or something. It's like, just Laura Ingalls Wilder books would be our dystopian science fiction future.
That's right.
After the great Google collapse of 2024. But it's really wild. I mean, I'm not a Luddite or anything. I don't want to go back in time, and I know we're not going to go back in time. But I want to have my kids be involved in animal agriculture, and not even agriculture, right? That's more like a business thing, but animal husbandry. And
Yeah. Actually know where our food's coming from.
right,
To see where it's coming from. And I think
Australia. Go ahead.
I'm just saying, I think we're getting disconnected from our food supply.
Absolutely, and it is systemic, and there's a lot of profit involved in it. And like you mentioned, it's when you're planning long term and you're playing long game, you make decisions in a different way than people that are constantly reacting to what the television tells them.
Yes.
And that's what's very hard to break people out of, is the mind state of, believing what you're told on the television. I mean, even, question what I'm saying. If you think something I'm saying sounds kooky and insane, do a little bit of research and prove me wrong. Test it out. And I think the critical thinking skills have been kind of on a decline, unfortunately.
And the concerning thing about the vegan movement, and again, not so much people who choose, and especially the Eastern version of vegetarianism, and they're caring about sentient animals and sentient beings. The concerning thing is this vigilant, cultish vegan movement. And in Australia, just this week, there was a group that put up a map of Australian farms, and they actually highlighted where farms were, posted it, animal farms, posted it on their website, and then sent it out to the vegan Facebook pages that they are attached to, and told vegans or their supporters, their foot soldiers, to go to these farms and let the animals free.
Vegan flash
And
mobs, yeah.
and this concept of setting animals free is the worst animal cruelty you could imagine. These are animals that are on, we're not talking factory farming. I'm not saying we don't have any factory farming, but in Australia, in Tasmania, certainly, our animals are out on the pastures. They're pasture fed, they're beautiful
That's all you
grasses.
can grow there. There's nothing else. What are you going to grow there?
We can grow apples.
Okay.
And so we are the Tasmanian apple isle. Maybe we're the Garden of Eden.
Yeah, we could make our sci-fi book about a future utopia where everybody's eating apple burgers.
Apple burgers. But they were encouraging people to go and set these animals free. And as one of my girlfriends was saying, a car hitting a cow in the middle of the night is going to damage the cow, but potentially kill people. But these animals don't know, if they're stuck on roads and stuck in areas where they can't get back onto the grasses, they're going to starve. And then they encourage these people to film what they were doing and then post it back on their site as, yay, we've done it. And they're encouraging them to wear masks and different things.
I had a whole thing. Scary. I was going to make a video about this, and I got so frustrated looking. I was like, no, I'm not going to make this video. It'll be too mean. It's insane. Well, did you see that they also, I don't know if it was the same group, Animals Australia, and this other, I think it was Animals Australia, got caught paying workers on live transport ships to cut off the air. Okay, so there was emails leaked where activists were paying for footage to people on live transport ships of sheep. So you got a big ship loaded up with sheep. They tell them, take the footage when the animals are under the most stress. And one of the emails from the worker said, oh, cool, I can just cut off the air supply and they'll look super stressed out because they'll be panting and they'll be suffocating. So extrapolate that to all these videos you see of them sneaking into slaughter. They sneak into the pig pen in the middle of the night and they switch on the lights on these pigs who are sleeping. And the activists then go and harass the pigs in the middle of the night and say, look how sad and tired these pigs are. Yeah, it's the middle of the night. You broke in there and you're shining a light and they don't know you. They're social animals.
And this is very, very concerning. I think we need to get together with a whole lot of people. And it can be people with ideology, it can be people with vested interests. We need to come to a table and actually tell everybody where our beliefs are and where we stand, because it's not about not making any profit. I understand that people need to survive and there's businesses and everything else, but it's out of whack at the moment. Animal farming is about a 5% increase on a lot of the things that you can produce. Wheat and sugar, you've got 2,000% increase on your profitability margin once you're selling things off. So, where do we work together and cut out this ideology and vested interest belief that animal proteins and fats are bad for us, and really look at the science, because there's a hell of a lot of science that shows that we need meat and fats. I mean, Zoe Harcum, in my article that I've posted as well, she said this EAT-Lancet Planetary Health diet, we're going to be short of vitamin D, vitamin K, potassium, sodium, and omega-3 fatty acids. We're going to be so short of so many essential nutrients that it makes no sense that they're even suggesting it becomes a global policy.
Right. And well, it's just so funny because, I mean, just looking back at the book I was talking about earlier, the St. John of Damascus, in the 7th century, these cults, in the first millennium, these cults were tying in abstinence from meat with celibacy and not breeding and not being married and not having children and procreating even back then. And it's just, to me, I mean, it's not only an attack on our sovereignty of, being well, sovereignty is a weird word, right? A lot of, I don't want to use that word, but our ability to choose what foods we eat is under direct attack, but also your ability to be fertile, your ability to actually, have children, have a family is directly influenced by your diet.
I think it's really concerning. I spoke to a young friend of ours, and she said 8 out of 10 of her friends had to have some sort of intervention to fall pregnant. This push to procreate much later in life, there's a whole lot of things we can go down and talk about, which is beyond our conversation today.
Yeah, we'll keep
But
it tight.
this concept, we're putting off procreating for so long. I don't know if you've read a book called Pottinger's Cats.
I have not read it, but I've heard of it.
Okay, and what they did, it was through the Weston A. Price Foundation, and so Pottinger's Cats, what they did, an experiment. It was an accidental experiment that began unexpectedly, but then they looked into it, and within 3 generations, the cats that had been fed processed milk and processed food had misshapen heads. They had their teeth were rotting. They were overcrowded. They wouldn't have been able to catch food in the wild. They weren't strong enough. And the scary thing was, by the 3rd generation, they were completely infertile.
Yeah, right.
Whereas the mix, the ones who had the unprocessed milk and the unprocessed food, the meat that was just raw, they were perfectly healthy and kept procreating. Are we slowly, because we've brought it in much more slowly, but now suddenly they're wanting to make a law that we eat this vegan food.
They'll say, well, we're not cats. Cats are carnivores, but we are omnivores. We're herbivores, right? That doesn't count. There'll be some excuse.
But we feed our cats omnivore, if not vegan diets now, because we think it's better for the planet. People are feeding their animals processed food that is plant-based.
and it's absolutely. So I guess we're going to do that with all the tigers and the lions and the even
what
horses
about the people?
will eat.
If we go to this EAT-Lancet Planetary Health diet, what is that going to do to our fertility, as you've been bringing up? Within 3 generations, will we be completely infertile? And will that go back to that crazy book then, that babies will be made in a lab because we can't actually make them ourselves?
Well, he talks about in that same article. He says he actually muses about taking the control of human breeding, and breeding a generation of, he calls them industrious dullards, and we can pepper the population with amusingly charming I think it's basically amusing mural painters. So we'll just have a bunch of industrial idiots that's what we'll breed, and then we'll entertain them. We'll breed them a bunch of Beyoncés or something. It's like what he was saying in 1929. That's not just some kook too. He's a British lord. He didn't write anything else. That's the only public writing that he put out, in a very popular U.S. publication. So strange. It's very strange.
Well, I'm not trying to be conspiratorial, but it's just this. There's no doubt that the food industry is driving, along with ideology. So ideology and industry are collaborating because their messages align. But my concern is, what is going to happen? What are we going to be eating, and where will fertility go, and our health? For people with type 2 diabetes, this diet is an absolute disaster. And I can't believe someone like Alessandro De Mayo, the doctor, his big push was that he wants to be free of type 2 diabetes, non-communicable disease free. And yet he's supporting a diet that's just going to, is it free that we'll just be free of them on the planet? Or that people will be free of these diseases? Because they certainly won't be free of those diseases if
people will be free of disease because there'll be no people left. They'll just be starved out, right?
So maybe that's his NCD free. That's a terrible thing to say. But I'm really concerned. Someone who had such great vision and was passionate about doing something different as a doctor, and not just getting into that system of band-aiding sick care. He wanted to do something different. And yet he's been swayed, he's been health washed to believe this planetary diet is the best thing. Right. And
And
I can't blame him.
your husband who didn't even maybe understand the full implications of all this before,
I had no idea.
right? He's just like, oh, this works. Look at all the science. This is legitimate. We should be using this. Shoot, I'm going to promote this, and he got a nice slap on the wrist for that. Um,
Well,
which
not
is
even a slap on the wrist. He was threatened with deregistration
right. He's
if
basically
he kept
flogged.
going.
He was flogged out of his position. So is Gary still practicing? Is he still practicing now?
Yes. He didn't have to stop practicing orthopedics. He just wasn't allowed to mention nutrition. And I guess part of it was we decided we'd defy the rules because we didn't believe them. Gary just said, no one can tell me not to offer best practice to my patients.
Yeah.
So I took over his no fructose Facebook page when he was first reported because they said you're not allowed to be on social media.
Wow.
So it became a big thing where it was Gary Fettke no fructose, put the big slash through it, Belinda Fettke no fructose. We did a big post about how a doctor was silenced. Actually had 1 million views of our Facebook page announcement, which was pretty exciting because Gary had 5,000 people following him. So I said it was me bringing a lot more people to his page. Yeah. But the crazy thing was I took that page over, but he refused to stop talking to his patients, to the community, and also got more confident to talk worldwide, being invited to meetings. And when this whole thing was thrown out by the other medical board, I think that has given a lot of strength to doctors who were seeing the health benefits of low carbohydrate, healthy fat principles and keto in the management of various diseases, and people's choice to use that in their health management or prevention. And now that APRA have said that Gary can talk, that it was all false and there was nothing there, it has meant that in Australia, for however long we can potentially do this for, doctors can talk about it safely. And Gary's patients can go and question things. But, Gary saw a patient in the hospital, and so the hospital were very, were watching him. All he wanted to do was offer his patients with diabetes an egg, some cheese, or some full-fat yogurt as a breakfast option instead of the high processed carbohydrate cereal options and fruit that was toast and cereals and things.
Yeah, junk.
And to bring eggs into the hospital system, to actually implement it into the Launceston General Hospital, he talked to the food department, and it was going to cost $10,000 for a year to provide the option of eggs, boiled eggs for people. And they couldn't get it past the hospital. The administration wouldn't pass it, wouldn't allow it. And yet they'll pay almost that much per day trying to manage people's out-of-control blood glucose from the diet. The hospital menu actually allows 3 desserts per day for people with diabetes.
3 desserts, but you can't have some cheese or eggs. And this is what
Gary was arguing. And they said, you're in trouble for questioning this. This is the guideline. And I guess another thing I've really been looking at, these guidelines have been shaped by vested interests and ideology. The guidelines have become rule books. I mean, guidelines should be flexible. You should be able to say, well, this guideline isn't working for this person, so I'm adapting it, and this is what we're going to do.
Maybe a few different templates for different contexts, right?
No, they've become strict rule books, and these rule books are fiercely protected by associations, including APRA, but fiercely protected by diabetes associations, cancer councils, heart foundations, to keep the rules happening. And these have been shaped by vested interests and ideology. Medical education is shaped by the pharmaceutical industry. They have got no idea, and the food industry, but dietitians, they've just been educated by the food industry. Yeah. And these guidelines are rule books. And unless we start cracking them open and going, what are you health professionals even doing? Why are you following this thing? You're making people sick. And imagine if a doctor had to consider that they'd spent all of that time, as Gary did. He actually wrote an official apology to his community and to his patients. He said, I'm sorry, I had no idea that in following these guidelines and just being health washed to do what I was told to do, that I was potentially creating harm, or I did create harm. And people who may have not had all these complications of diabetes, had I known about things earlier, I could have potentially saved this. Now, I'm really sorry. I think a lot of doctors find this very hard to admit that what they're doing is creating harm. But if they stay within the guidelines, they can't be sued and they can't be in trouble by the regulators. They can't be deregistered if they can prove that despite how much harm happened to somebody, they were following the guidelines. This is the problem with the health system.
Yeah.
And this is the concern with that EAT-Lancet. If it gets into policy and becomes a dietary guideline and it gets into medical education and doctors believe that this is what they have to prescribe, then no matter how much harm happens, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And I think the last time doctors really had to consider how much harm was prescribed by something is when they prescribed thalidomide. And I would almost compare thalidomide and the deformities, which were only 10,000 or so, compared to what is happening with diabetes now. Complications of diabetes and all the people who are becoming limbless.
I had to mute my mic. The wind is blowing open a door behind me. I'm sorry to everybody who keeps
Sorry.
hearing the creaking.
That's okay. Well, you've had me for so long now. I think you've
I
probably gone
appreciate you hanging out for so long. It's been so nice talking. I'm looking at your article here, just the quote that you put on the in this article. I'm not seeing where this is from, but it says, however, the scale of change to the food system is unlikely to be successful if left to the individual or to the whim of consumer choice. This
That's
change
part of the
requires
EAT-Lancet document.
That's in the document. So this change requires reframing at the population and systemic level. By contrast, hard policy interventions include laws, fiscal measures, subsidies and penalties, trade reconfiguration, and other economic and structural measures. So this is economics, right? They're talking about influencing behavior via economics. And this is not about, well, who cares? Vegans never did anything to me. I agree. Yeah, look, the vegan on the floor has no idea what's going on with this. We're talking about processed food, junk food manufacturers who are pushing an agenda and utilizing people whose intentions may to them seem innocent, right? The people on the ground, they're just, well, I want to save the animals, or I want to be healthy, right? And industry has hijacked that, and it's clear that
not just the community, but hijacked health professionals. They are completely believing in this message as well.
How does EAT-Lancet propose working with the medical system? Did you look much into that part of it?
Yeah, I've put a little bit of the action up there, but they want to get into medical education. And part of my research prior to the EAT-Lancet coming out, I've been watching the lifestyle medicine education collaborative, which is part of this lifestyle medicine initiative. And the lifestyle medicine, and I would say Adventist church message, the vegan Garden of Eden diet, but definitely promoted by the Adventist belief, is joining up with Coca-Cola and their exercises medicine. And so lifestyle medicine and exercise medicine is creating this medical curriculum. They're already putting it out to 4 universities in America at the moment, of course, Harvard and Loma Linda. But Stanford University announced recently they're so excited to have this, be trialing this, and they've been doing cooking with their doctors, and the plant-based plates have maybe a little bit of chicken or fish as a garnish. That's what they're teaching doctors. Like, this is, you have it as a garnish and that's all.
It's like oregano. Fish is kind of like oregano. You don't need it. It might make something tasty.
Yeah, just sprinkle a little bit on at the side.
Put a little bit of fish powder in your Cheerios.
But no red meat whatsoever. And this is becoming medical education. They are lobbying to the government at this point in time. In Australia, the Australasian Society of Lifestyle Medicine are going, we've got to get this into the government. There, you can already get points around the world for different continuing education by doing the courses and doing the exams and things. And it's a vegan, plant-based agenda that is the Seventh-day Adventist message. So the EAT-Lancet is separate to that. It's this billionaire belief in utopia and the food industry, pharmaceutical industry all getting together, but they're also providing medical education. And the key person between both of these associations is Walter Willett. He's part of the advisory board of lifestyle medicine and part of the co-chair of the EAT-Lancet Commission report.
And check out, so I'm looking at the American College
of vegan into medical curriculum. Is he hedging his bets by being on both of them? Because which one's going to win? Which one's going to get in there? Or is he just going at it from both prongs and who knows what else? But this is the biggest change to medical education since the low-fat era, and every doctor thought, thank goodness we've got a way to stop people having heart attacks. We're going to save the world. And they all believed it. And now it's this vegan push. So,
Well, they believe they're going to stop cancer also with the plant-based diet. And it's just crazy. So I'm looking at the American College of Lifestyle Medicine's, I guess this is their board. You've got John McDougall, Dr. McDougall, Dean Ornish. Just a lot of these famous vegan activist style doctors.
vegan
And then
activists are on there, but also a lot of Seventh-day Adventists
and Walter Willett from the
and Walter
Harvard
Willett.
School of Public Health. Harvard School of Public Health. I'm not sure about you, but I don't remember asking Harvard to manage the health of my community and my family. But I don't know. Maybe they didn't get my message. They didn't get my memo.
No.
Yeah. So I mean, this is really this has been such a great. I don't want to go too long in the presentation because I mean, maybe
Yeah.
keep it short and sweet. But Belinda, thank you so much for coming on. I've got your website still pulled up here. I support Gary, so you could use the hashtag I support Gary if you want to check out some of Belinda's tweets. Belinda Fettke is also on Twitter. What's your Twitter handle?
Just Belinda Fettke.
Belinda Fettke on Twitter. Any closing thoughts? Anything else you want to share?
I think we all just need to challenge people who are dictating how we eat, especially when it's compromising our health. That's my biggest thing. I've been challenging the evolution of the plant-based dietary guidelines for years, and if you're happy to read some of my work and share it, I reference a lot. I wasn't the first person who worked this out, so but I've been putting lots of the jigsaw pieces together, and I think it's just fascinating history. And it's the Garden of Eden diet is a religious ideology, and it's not my choice, and it's not my husband's choice for health, because the plant-based diet is not suitable for us. So challenge things. You don't have to believe someone. The hardest thing is because it's guidelines, a lot of doctors won't support people who want to do low carb, especially type 1 diabetes. They're really struggling to get that support. A lot of people with cancer, because the guidelines don't allow it yet. So my big mission this year, I supported Gary and I got him off. Like, it took 4.5 years, but last year he was exonerated of all charges. So my decision this year, what I'd really love to do is work more and more around changing the guidelines and letting people know this is just all fake. So be noisy with me, that's my hashtag.
Awesome. Belinda Fettke, everybody.